The moment my husband left, the heart monitor screamed. Not the polite beep beep you hear on television. This was a shrill, panicked wail that sliced through the ICU like a fire alarm for the soul. Nurses moved fast, too fast, and someone barked numbers I refused to understand. My son's body jerked once beneath the sheet, then went frighteningly still. And my husband, my brilliant, articulate, impeccably groomed husband, took one step back. Just one. I remember noticing the ridiculous details first. The way his coat was still buttoned, as if he'd only stepped in for coffee. The way he checked his watch, not dramatically, just instinctively, like a man late for a meeting instead of standing beside his unconscious child. I can't do this, he said. No tears. No cracking voice. Just irritation, like the room had asked something unreasonable of him. I didn't answer. I was gripping the rail of the hospital bed, so hard my fingers had gone numb. The nurse yelled for a crash cart. The monitor screamed louder. I didn't sign up for this, he added, softer now, as if that made it kinder. Then he turned and walked out. No dramatic pause. No last look at our son. Just the quiet, devastating click of his shoes against the floor, fading down the corridor. When the automatic doors hissed shut behind him, something inside me sealed just as tightly. I stayed. I stayed while doctors pushed drugs into my son's veins and argued in urgent whispers. I stayed while the machines fought to keep him here. I stayed when a nurse gently suggested I sit down, and I told her, politely, calmly, that if I let go of that bed, I might collapse into pieces too small to put back together. My son's chest finally rose again, shallow and mechanical, and the screaming machine settled into a grudging rhythm. Alive. For now. Only then did I realize my husband hadn't come back. Not after 5 minutes. Not after 10. Not after the nurse brought me water I didn't drink. Not after the doctor cleared his throat and said the words that rearranged my entire life. Severe brain trauma, he said. If he wakes up, things may be different. Different. Doctors love that word. It covers everything from a limp to a lifetime. He nodded like he understood. Inside, I was screaming. I looked down at my son, my bright, quiet boy with ink-stained fingers and a habit of sketching in the margins of his schoolbooks. Tubes crisscrossed his body. His head was wrapped in white bandages that made him look smaller, younger, heartbreakingly fragile. I'm here, I whispered, pressing my forehead to his hand. I'm not going anywhere. The nurse beside me gave a tight smile. She had the look of someone who'd seen this scene too many times. I wondered how often she saw the other version, the one where both parents stayed. Hours later, maybe it hit me. I was alone. I pulled out my phone. No missed calls. No messages. Just a short text sent earlier, while my son was still fighting for his life. I need space. Don't call. I laughed. It came out sharp and wrong. A sound that startled the nurse passing by. Space. Yes. He'd always needed that. Space from mess. Space from inconvenience. Space from anything that couldn't be fixed with money or charm. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my jacket and went back to holding my son's hand. That was when I felt it. Something cool and solid pressed against my palm beneath the blanket. Not part of the machines. Not part of him. Frowning, I gently shifted his fingers and reached into the pocket of the jeans he'd been wearing when the ambulance brought him in. My heart began to race, not from fear this time, but instinct. The kind mothers develop when something is wrong in a way that doesn't announce itself. My fingers closed around a small metal object. A key. Plain. Silver. Old-fashioned. Tied to it was a scrap of paper, folded so many times it was soft as cloth. My breath caught as I unfolded it. The handwriting was my son's. Messy. Rushed. Determined. Mom. If something happens, don't trust him. Use this. The room tilted. I stared at the words until they blurred, then looked up at the door my husband had walked through. He hadn't just left us. He'd left at the exact moment he thought he could. I closed my fist around the key and leaned closer to my son, my voice steady even as my world cracked clean in half. He stayed, he whispered. And whatever this is, I'll finish it. Outside, somewhere beyond the sterile walls and humming machines, my husband was walking away. Inside, the real story was just beginning. Before hospitals became my whole world, there were warning signs. I ignored them the way people ignore small cracks in a wall, assuming they were cosmetic, not structural. The night my son collapsed didn't begin with sirens or panic. It began with silence. The wrong kind. The kind that stretches too long before you realize it's dangerous. I remember calling his name from the kitchen, my hands dusted with flour, annoyed that he hadn't answered. Teenagers specialize in selective hearing. I expected an eye roll, maybe a grunt. Instead, I found him on the floor of his room. His sketchbook was open beside him. A half-finished drawing stared up at me. Dark lines, jagged shapes, something unfinished and urgent. His body was twisted at an angle that made my brain refuse to cooperate. Time fractured. I don't remember screaming, but neighbors later told me they heard it. I remember dialing emergency services with fingers that didn't feel attached to my hands. I remember my husband standing in the doorway, frozen, already backing away emotionally even as his body remained in the room. He probably fainted, he said. Probably. That word followed me all the way to the hospital. On the drive, my son lay strapped to a stretcher, oxygen mask fogging with each shallow breath. I held his hand. My husband sat up front, silent, scrolling on his phone as if the right headline might save us. At the hospital, doctors moved fast. Nurses asked questions that felt absurdly detailed. Medications, allergies, dates, times. My husband answered when spoken to, but his voice had already detached itself from the moment. When they wheeled our son into imaging, my husband finally spoke. "This is a lot," he said. I looked at him, really looked, and saw something I hadn't wanted to see before. Not fear. Fear would have been forgivable. What I saw was calculation. "What exactly do you mean?" I asked. He exhaled slowly, as if I were the unreasonable one. "If this turns into long-term care, we need to be realistic." Realistic? I didn't answer. I didn't trust myself to. The scans came back. The doctor's expression did not soften when he spoke. Trauma. Swelling. Uncertainty. Watching and waiting. Waiting, it turns out, is where weak people reveal themselves. By the time they moved our son to intensive care, my husband had started pacing the hallway. Not with worry. With restlessness. Like a man stuck in traffic. "I have calls I can't miss," he said. "This could go on for weeks." "He's our child," I said quietly. He flinched at that. As if the word "our" had suddenly become negotiable. The machines hadn't started screaming yet. That came later. But something inside my husband had already decided. When the doctor explained the risks, coma, impairment, the possibility that our son might not wake at all, I felt the ground vanish beneath me. My husband felt something else entirely. "This isn't what I planned my life to be," he said. That was when I knew. Not consciously. Not logically. But somewhere deep in my chest, a door slammed shut. When the monitor finally screamed and the nurses rushed in, my husband stepped back. When they stabilized our son, and the room filled with breathless relief, my husband checked his watch. And when the doctor said, "You should prepare yourselves," my husband prepared to leave. By the time the words "I can't do this" left his mouth, he'd already gone. I stayed. I stayed through the night, memorizing the rhythm of machines. I stayed when exhaustion made my vision blur. I stayed when the chair bruised my back, and my phone filled with messages I didn't answer. And when I found the key in my son's pocket, when I read his warning, everything rearranged itself. He hadn't just been afraid. He'd known. And now so did I. In the quiet hours before dawn, with my son suspended between worlds and my marriage already dead, I made a decision I didn't yet understand the weight of. If my husband had walked away because staying was too hard, then staying would become my weapon. People think staying is passive. They're wrong. Staying is an active, grinding, minute-by-minute decision not to disappear. The first night after my husband left, I didn't sleep. I sat upright in a plastic chair that had been designed by someone who clearly hated the human spine. I counted breaths. I memorized the rise and fall of my son's chest like it was a code I'd need to recite later to prove I belonged there. Nurses came and went. Some spoke softly. Others didn't speak at all. I learned which footsteps meant good news, and which ones made my stomach clench. No one asked where my husband was. They never do. By morning, the messages started. Not from him. From everyone else. Maybe he just needs time. Men handle stress differently. At least one of you is strong. I stared at my phone and wondered how strength had become such a lonely thing. Late that afternoon, a social worker sat across from me with a clipboard and practiced compassion. She asked about support systems, finals, contingency plans. Is your husband involved? She asked gently. I smiled. It felt like lying with my whole face. He stepped out, I said. She nodded in a way that told me she'd heard that sentence more times than she could count. When the hospital quieted at night, the doubts got louder. What if my husband was right? What if this broke me? What if staying meant sacrificing everything I was? There were moments, real ones, when I stared at the door and imagined walking through it. Just once. Just to breathe without machines telling me whether my child was winning or losing. Dark humor crept in where hope ran thin. I named the heart monitor Gerald. Gerald was dramatic and screamed over nothing. The 4-pump became Karen because it beeped when it absolutely did not need to. I whispered insults to them under my breath and felt slightly unhinged but better. Weeks blurred together. My son didn't wake. Bills arrived anyway. Paperwork multiplied like bacteria. And still no husband. When he finally called, it wasn't to ask about our son. It was to ask about the house. I'm staying with a friend, he said, as if this were a temporary inconvenience. I'll need some things. I waited for him to mention our child. He didn't. Do you want to see him? I asked. There was a pause. A long one. I think it's better if I remember him how he was, he said. I laughed again. That sharp, broken sound. You mean before responsibility, I replied. He hung up shortly after. That night, after the nurses dimmed the lights, I took the key from my pocket. I'd been carrying it everywhere, rubbing my thumb against the metal like a talisman. My son had trusted me. Not his father. Me. That mattered. When I finally went home to shower and change clothes, the house felt hollow. His shoes were gone. His side of the bed untouched. The absence wasn't loud, it was efficient. I went to my son's room. That was where I found it. The desk. The loose panel. The hidden compartment my husband had never noticed because he'd never really looked. Inside was the notebook. And the drive. My hands shook as I opened the first page. Mom, if you're reading this, I couldn't say it out loud. I sat on the floor and cried silently, the kind of crying that doesn't make noise because you've run out of energy. What followed was meticulous. Observations. Dates. Conversations overheard. Not wild accusations, patterns. Things my husband had said when he thought no one was listening. Plans. Escape routes. A life that did not include us. The truth settled in slowly, like poison diluted just enough to hurt longer. My husband hadn't left because our son was sick. He had left because staying would have trapped him in a life where he couldn't pretend he was the hero. I closed the notebook and wiped my face. In the quiet of that room, surrounded by sketches and unfinished dreams, I made another promise. I would stay for my son. And I would stay long enough for the truth to catch up with the man who ran. He came back the way cowards always do, slowly, and only when he thought the danger had passed. My son opened his eyes on a gray morning when the rain tapped softly against the ICU windows. No dramatic gasp. No miracle music. Just a flutter, a confused blink. And then his fingers tightening weakly around mine. I laughed and cried at the same time. A sound so unhinged the nurse rushed in thinking something was wrong. Mom, he whispered. Yes, I said, pressing my forehead to his hand. I'm here. I stayed. Recovery was not a montage. It was brutal. Pain. Frustration. Physical therapy that left him exhausted and angry. Words that sometimes slipped away mid-sentence. Days when progress felt like a rumor. I was there for all of it. And when the doctors finally downgraded him from critical, that's when my phone buzzed. I heard he's awake, the message read. Maybe I can stop by. Maybe. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred, then typed back 3 words. We'll discuss later. He arrived a week later, standing in the doorway like a man who'd wandered into the wrong theater. He brought flowers, cheap ones, and an apology that never quite apologized. "This has been hard on me," he began. I almost laughed him out of the room. My son watched him with quiet intensity, eyes sharper than anyone realized. Illness had taken some things from him. Awareness was not one of them. "You left," my son said simply. My husband flinched. "I needed space," he replied. "Your mother understands." I didn't correct him. I didn't raise my voice. I just let silence do the work. The visit ended quickly. After that, the calls stopped. But consequences don't require confrontation. They only require time. While my son rebuilt himself, I rebuilt our lives. Paperwork, accounts, legal protections I'd never imagined needing. Quiet conversations with professionals who knew how to read between lines. The notebook my son had kept became a roadmap. Not for revenge, but for clarity. And clarity is dangerous. My husband's version of events unraveled under scrutiny. His timelines didn't match. His finances told a story he hadn't intended to share. The more I stayed, the less room there was for his lies to hide. When the final notice arrived, formal, undeniable, he showed up at the house unannounced. "You did this," he said, eyes wild. "You ruined me." I looked at him calmly. "No. Iraplia. You left. I stayed. This is just the math." He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. For the first time, he realized something. He no longer mattered. He left again that night, but this time there was no door left open for him. I went upstairs and checked on my son. He was asleep, breathing steadily, his sketchbook open beside him. The storm had passed, and the man who ran had finally reached the place he deserved, outside the story. The house was quiet in a way that no longer frightened me. Morning light spilled across the kitchen table, warm and ordinary, touching the chipped mug in my hands and the scattered pencils my son had forgotten to put away. Ordinary had once felt impossible. Now it felt earned. My son sat across from me, sketching. His movements were steadier these days. Not perfect. Not rushed. Deliberate. He paused often, studying the page like the image was negotiating its way out of his mind instead of being forced. I watched him without hiding it. He looked up and smirked. "You're doing it again." "Doing what?" "Watching me like I might disappear." I smiled into my coffee. Old habits. Recovery taught us patience. Not the inspirational kind people post online, but the quiet, grinding version that shows up every day whether you feel ready or not. Physical therapy. Speech exercises. Frustration. Breakthroughs so small they felt imaginary until they stacked into something real. Through it all, my husband remained absent. He tried, once, to reframe the story. Emails full of reflection. Regret shaped suspiciously like inconvenience. He spoke about fear, about pressure, about how anyone might have done the same. I didn't respond, because the truth didn't need defending. When legal proceedings finished, clean, quiet, irreversible, I felt no triumph. Only relief. The kind that settles deep and stays. My son never asked why his father didn't come back. I think he already knew. One afternoon, months later, he handed me a drawing. Two figures stood side by side in it, facing forward. Behind them, a doorway stood open but empty. "I called it staying," he said. I swallowed hard. "It's perfect." That night, after he went to bed, I stood in the hallway where my husband had once packed his bags. I remembered the woman I'd been then. Terrified, exhausted, afraid that staying meant losing myself. I had been wrong. Staying didn't shrink me. It sharpened me. It taught me that love isn't proven by words or promises, but by who remains when leaving would be easier. It taught me that abandonment is loud in the moment, but irrelevant in the end. The world didn't clap when I stayed. No one handed me a medal. But every morning I wake up in a house filled with laughter again. Every evening I hear pencils scratching across paper. Every ordinary moment is a victory no one can take from me. My husband walked away from a sick child because he couldn't face uncertainty. I stayed. And that choice saved my son. It saved me. And if this story proves anything, it's this. Walking away is easy. Staying is power. Please click the subscribe button, like, share, and comment. This will encourage me to make more interesting stories. Also, let's know where you are watching from. Thank you and see you in the next story.